People of Reddit, have you ever killed anyone? If so, what were the circumstances? The accident. When I was 17 years old, I only had my learner's permit for driving. One evening, I was driving home from a doctor's appointment with my mom. It was already fully dark outside, about 9:30 at night, but I was doing everything by the book. My headlights were on, I had turned off the radio, I was driving at the speed limit, and I was not using my cell phone or anything else. Then, suddenly, a young boy ran right out into the street in front of me. I slammed on the brakes as hard as I could, but I hit him anyway. The boy rolled off my windshield. I was completely in shock. The first thing I did was pull over, put the car in park, and get out. I saw all the other cars stopped around me, and the boy's body lying in the middle of the street. I had no idea what to do. My legs would not move, and all I could do was cry and scream. A man nearby was trying to resuscitate the boy, but nothing worked. Within minutes, ambulances and police cars showed up everywhere. But the chaos around me was not the worst part. The worst part was when the boy's father came outside, saw his son on the ground, and dropped to his knees crying and screaming. I was shaking uncontrollably and could hardly hold myself together. The police told me to stay in the car with my mom while they did everything they could to save the boy. All I could think was, please don't be dead. Please don't be dead. Later, I found out that the ambulance took him to a nearby high school, where a helicopter flew him to the hospital. The next day, I learned he died on the way there. His name was Elijah. He was only 9 years old, 2 years younger than my brother. I was very lucky not to be charged with anything. I had no points on my license when I finally got it. I never spoke with Elijah's father, but I read in the newspaper that he had lost his wife only 3 months before my accident. After it happened, I hated myself. I could hardly sleep, I didn't want to eat, and I couldn't smile for weeks. About a month later, my mom and I were driving to the same doctor's office I had left the day of the accident. The road where the accident happened could not be avoided, and I saw Elijah's vigil set up by the side of the road. He had been such a normal kid. He loved football and cartoons, and he was very smart. It took me a long time to stop blaming myself and accept that it was a tragic accident. This all happened about 4 years ago, and I still think about it sometimes. I still feel guilty, and it is a dark part of my past I don't like to talk about. But a few years ago, during the summer, I was at the beach with my family. I was sitting in the water when a little boy, about 2 or 3 years old, came up to me. He said hi and started splashing water at me. When I realized he wasn't with anyone, I got scared that he was lost. Just then, a woman ran over, shouting, "Elijah! Elijah! Oh, thank God, you found my son. Thank you." She picked him up, and the boy waved goodbye to me as she walked away. I still get chills every time I tell that story. The accident. I am using a throwaway account because this is something I rarely talk about. When I was 12 years old, I was babysitting for a family who lived in my neighborhood. They had 2 little girls. One was 3 years old, the other was 6, and a baby who was only 5 months old. I had some experience babysitting before, but I was not very confident around babies. I was pretty nervous and honestly not the most responsible or mature kid at the time. The 2 older girls were sitting on the living room floor, reading quietly, when suddenly the baby started crying in her crib. I went over to pick her up and took her into the kitchen to warm her milk bottle in the microwave. Somehow I dropped her. I have replayed that moment in my mind over and over again, thousands of times, and there is no other way to explain it. The baby slipped from my arms and her head hit the tile floor. It was clear right away that she was gone. The strangest thing was how calm I felt after it happened, almost like I turned into a robot. I told the girls to go straight to the basement. Then I called my father and explained what had happened. I waited at the kitchen table for about 10 minutes until he arrived. He drove the girls to our house so they could be with my mother. Then he took me and the baby to the hospital. Of course, there was nothing anyone could do. I was never charged with a crime because it was ruled an accidental death. There was a possibility I could have faced criminally negligent manslaughter charges, but because of my age, that did not happen. This all happened many years ago, but the pain stays with me every day. I am a woman now, and I do not think I will ever be able to have children because of what happened. The family eventually moved away, but until they left, I would throw up every time I drove past their house or saw one of them around the neighborhood. Home invasion. I have used this throwaway account before to answer questions like this one. This incident involved two men breaking into my home. I ended up shooting both of them with my AR-15 rifle. I hit one guy 3 times and the other 4 times. The rifle was a Novesk, loaded with 75-grain Hornady tap rounds. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning, but I was still awake trying to finish some work for the next day. I heard the sound of glass breaking and hitting the wooden floor in my living room, and I knew immediately something was wrong. My girlfriend and my dog were asleep in the bedroom with me, and my niece and nephew were sleeping in the room across the hall. I was watching them for the weekend. I quietly woke my girlfriend and told her to stay silent and call 911. I still had my carry gun on me from earlier that day, but I decided to grab my rifle instead. I could hear the crunching of broken glass under the intruder's feet downstairs. If it had just been my girlfriend and me in the house, I would have stayed in the bedroom, but since my niece and nephew were so close by, I did not want anyone coming upstairs. I positioned myself at the top of the stairs and stayed very quiet, hoping the intruders would just take the television and game consoles from the living room and leave. After about 1 or 2 minutes, both men moved into the downstairs hallway and started heading toward the stairs. I stood up so they could see me, pointed my rifle at them, and yelled for them to get the hell out of my house. Before I finished speaking, one of them raised a pistol and began shooting at me. I did not see him draw his weapon, so he must have already had it in his hand and I did not notice. I returned fire and hit both of them multiple times. After they were down, I kept my rifle trained on them and did not move. I fired 12 shots and hit 7 times. They fired 6 shots at me but all missed. 2 bullets were found in the bookcase I was standing behind. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. When I saw their flashing lights outside, I lowered my rifle, cleared it, and leaned it against the wall. I also removed my carry gun and set it down next to the rifle. I do not regret what I did one bit. However, I do think back on the situation and realize I made some mistakes. I should have noticed the guy had a gun in his hand immediately. I also should have been faster on the trigger. I let them get the first shots off, and if I had been hit, things could have turned out very differently. The accident on the street. About 5 years ago, my friends and I were walking down a street in London on a Sunday morning after a night of drinking. We were heading out to get brunch. A family was walking toward us. There was a 3-year-old boy with them. The father was holding the boy's hand, but the kid suddenly pulled free and ran straight into the middle of the street. He was hit by a car right away. I can still see the scene clearly when I close my eyes, but I won't describe it here. The boy was bleeding and hurt, but he was awake, crying and talking. What stuck with me most, though, was the driver. He was a young man who looked tough and was dressed in what some would call gangsta style. Even so, he was standing on the sidewalk crying openly. Everyone else was focused on the injured boy and ignored the driver, but I felt a deep sympathy for him. He had done absolutely nothing wrong. He was driving carefully within the speed limit and had slammed on the brakes as hard as he could. He stayed at the scene, checked on the boy, and was clearly very upset by what happened. I walked over to him and told him I had seen everything and that I would back him up if anyone tried to blame him. He was shaking, so I gave him a hug and told him again that he was not at fault. Soon an ambulance arrived and took the boy away. My friends left to go get brunch, but I stayed until the police came. I gave them a full statement about what I had seen, emphasizing that the driver was blameless, and told them I was willing to be a witness if necessary. I never heard back from them, so I think everything was resolved. Even with our best efforts, we live in a violent and unpredictable world where bad things sometimes happen for no one's fault. Sometimes terrible things just happen, and nobody is to blame. I am glad you have come to terms with your own tragedy and understand that it was just a cruel twist of fate. The universe is unfair. It was unfair for that little boy and his father, and it is unfair that you have carried the weight of something so random and terrible. I wish you the best. The accident at night. I am using a throwaway account again. Let me take you back almost 4 years, early 2009. I was just 2 months into being 17 years old. I was a careful driver. I followed all the rules. Driving the speed limit, not texting, always wearing my seatbelt, hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. One night, the McDonald's in my town was closed. So, me driving my SUV, my friend and I headed to the McDonald's in the next town over. We were waiting for another friend to finish work so we could all go to the movies together. When you drive through town, you catch every single red or green light for miles. That night, I was lucky and caught all green lights. It was raining a little, but the weather wasn't too bad. I was driving 5 miles per hour below the 50 miles per hour speed limit. As I went through one light, there was a car dealership on my right, and on the other side of the street was a shopping center casting a big shadow on my side. I was in the middle lane. A few cars were behind me, but not too close. There was no one in front of me for a few stoplights. I was almost through the green light when I saw a weird glare. My friend yelled, "Oh shit, it's a person!" Right away. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over. I had hit a woman. She was wearing all black. At night. She was walking across an intersection where she had a red light and wasn't even in a crosswalk. I froze. I honestly don't think I even put the car in park. After what felt like forever, I looked over and saw the woman standing at the median. At the same time, my friend grabbed a phone to call the police and our parents. I never wanted to die more than I did that moment. I wanted to get out of the car and stand in traffic. I didn't think I could live with what had happened. I tried to open my door, but my bent fender was blocking it. I needed help from a big Russian police officer to get out. I don't know how I made it through that night. I'm doing pretty well now. I still get down sometimes, and I have flashbacks every once in a while, but that's part of living with post-traumatic stress disorder. It really sucks, but I am so lucky to have a great support system with my friends. Well, that's my story. Hope you all have an awesome rest of your weekend. The story at the bar. A few years ago, I was out having drinks with some friends. Somehow, the conversation turned to car accidents. One guy in our group said that he had killed 2 people in a car accident about 4 years before. The way he said it was so casual, like it was no big deal. At first, I honestly thought he was joking. But then another person who knew him better said, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." I asked him if he would tell me more about it. He said that one night, he was driving home after a long day of work. The sun had already gone down, and it was drizzling outside, nothing too bad. But he started to fall asleep behind the wheel, lost control of his car, crossed into the other lanes, and slammed into another vehicle. The crash killed a young couple. The police investigated and said it was just a loss of control because of the weather. He never told them he had fallen asleep. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter and had to do community service. What stuck with me was how he told the story, like it was just, well, shit happens. I don't know if telling the police he fell asleep would have changed anything about his punishment. Later, I found out from another friend that he had learned to come to terms with what happened. At one point, he even thought about ending his own life. I also heard that after the trial, the family of the couple reached out to him to say they forgave him. But the fact that he lied to the police made it feel worse for everyone. A veteran and police officer's story. This is not my own story, but it comes from my uncle. He served as a sniper in Vietnam and later worked for the New York City Police Department. During his time in Vietnam, he estimates that he killed between 6 and 9 people. It is hard to say for sure because sometimes you just could not tell if a shot was a kill or not. He says he felt bad about it then and still does, but he understood that it was something he had to do. He is not sure if everyone who has killed someone feels the same way, but every time you take a life, it takes something away from you. It is difficult for him to explain exactly what that means. After returning home, he joined the New York City Police Department. He worked as a beat cop, mostly around 42nd Street and Broadway. In 1979, he and another officer witnessed an assault and robbery in progress. They drew their guns and ordered the attacker to get on the ground. Instead, the man pulled a knife from his coat and charged at them, so they opened fire. The attacker died at the scene. Back then, he is not sure how it works now. If you killed someone while on duty, you had to take a temporary leave from work. 2 weeks after he returned, he was walking to his car around 2 o'clock in the morning. From across the street, a man began approaching him, pulling a knife from his coat. My uncle showed his badge and his gun and told the man he was a police officer. The man did not stop. He repeated himself, but the man kept coming. When the man was about 5 feet away, my uncle shot him twice in the torso. The man survived, which my uncle is thankful for. Having already taken so many lives, he does not think he could handle killing again. The backpacks and the fireworks. When I was younger, my buddy and I used to roam the streets at night, causing trouble and acting rebellious. One night, a gang of about 5 or 6 guys jumped us and took our backpacks and everything valuable we had. About a week later, a kid who was a grade ahead of us came up and asked for $500 in exchange for our stuff. We said no because most of the things we had stolen anyway. The next day, while I was doing chores in my grandparents' backyard, that same kid showed up with our bags. He told me we had until the end of the weekend to come up with the money. I told him I could meet him behind my old middle school, in the big drainage ditch, but I needed an extra day or two. I was just stalling to buy some time and to get him away from the neighborhood. To my surprise, he agreed. I told my friend what was going on. We weren't sure how this was going to turn out. We thought there'd probably be a bunch of guys waiting to rob us and not give our stuff back. So we gathered all the fireworks and flammable stuff we could find and packed it into a lunchbox. We made sure everything was packed tightly and cut a small hole in the box to pull out intertwined fuses. On the night of the meetup, we were both scared of what might happen. Luckily, the kid showed up alone. He had our stuff and kept his word. As I grabbed the bags and thanked him for being cool about it, my friend lit the fuses and tossed him the lunchbox. We got the hell out of there fast. We heard the box go off and a scream that scared us both. We never heard from that kid or his friends again, and we have no idea what happened to them. It happened the same week wildfires burned through our neighborhood. We never looked back or wanted to. Our bags were mostly full of dog poop in plastic bags, so honestly, I don't really care much about what happened either. The cabin in the woods. I know this might sound unbelievable, but I swear it's true. This happened when I was about 15 years old. I lived with my parents out in the middle of nowhere, Michigan. All me and my friends did was go out into the wilderness and shoot stuff. Animals, trees, cans, whatever we could find. One day we were walking deep in the woods, past where we usually went, and we got kind of lost. None of us were really worried since it was only about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so we still had a few hours of daylight left. But then we reached a part of the woods that was really dark, with lots of thick overgrowth. We stumbled across a rundown cabin, which was strange because nobody should be living that far out. Being dumb 15-year-olds, we started checking out the cabin. First, we looked around the outside to see if anyone was home. Then we went inside. What we found inside was seriously messed up. There were newspaper clippings all over the walls about different crimes, pictures of naked women with their eyes and private parts cut out, and other creepy stuff. Then we went into the back room, and that's where we found the worst things. There were shackles on the floor and what looked like very old dried blood. We were freaking out. Suddenly, we heard the front door open. I went into survival mode because I knew whoever lived here wasn't going to let us leave peacefully or alive. He started walking toward the back room where we were pressed against the corner. When he opened the door and saw us, he reached for a hunting knife on his belt. Before he could grab it, I shot him twice in the chest. We ran as fast as we could for about an hour. We all went home without saying a word to each other, and we never talked about it again. The stalker. I had a stalker who spent about 6 months after me. It started off just as chatting online, but he was a little creepy and got worse as time went on. I finally tried to cut contact and he went completely crazy. That's when I got as aggressive as I ever do. He was making tons of accounts on different messaging apps, messaging my friends, going after my parents, and all kinds of other stuff. One night, he called me and said that if I didn't talk to him, he was going to kill himself. I told him to do it right then on the phone with me listening. I said if he did, I'd talk to him before he died. He left the call for a minute, and I hung up on him. Later, I heard that he had hung himself that night. I checked my phone and saw that he'd left me a bunch of messages. I don't really feel bad about it. He made my life miserable. Maybe I could have called the police or tried to get him a therapist, but there are better people in this world who deserve that oxygen. The accident I almost caused. This story is not about me directly, but I always felt like I was partly responsible. My girlfriend was on her way to my house one day. She never showed up. Finally, she called me from the local hospital, crying, telling me she was strapped to a gurney after a car crash on the way to my place. All I could get from her was that she saw a baby fly out of the other car's rear window and hit another car. I drove straight to the hospital and found her still on the gurney with a neck brace. She seemed okay, all things considered. Her mom, dad, and sister arrived around the same time. What happened next, I didn't tell her about until 10 years later. An orderly came and took her away, and her mom and sister went with her, leaving me alone with her dad in the hallway. Minutes later, the family from the other car arrived and started asking a nearby police officer what had happened. I watched as the officer calmly and carefully told them that the woman, their daughter and sister, had died in the crash. Her baby, whom she had been breastfeeding, had been thrown from the car and was in critical condition. The driver of that car, another relative, was seriously hurt but stable. I was 20 years old then. Now, I'm 43. I have never seen a sadder thing in my life than that family grieving over the news. It was horrible. I just broke down and cried right there in the hallway. In a strange way, my girlfriend's dad and I kind of bonded in that moment, witnessing such pain together. We never talked about it again, and he never mentioned it to his family. My girlfriend and I broke up a couple years later but stayed friends. Somehow, 10 years later, we were hanging out and the accident came up. I started to cry. She asked me what was wrong, and I finally told her everything I had seen. I had promised myself I would never tell her because I didn't want her to suffer through it again. We hugged it out, and thankfully, by then she had learned to deal with the accident better. It is still the saddest thing I have ever seen. The baby survived and ended up okay. The intersection decision. When I was a teenager, my friends and I decided to go out on a Saturday night to a local arcade. I was one of the few people with a car, so I went to pick up a couple of friends. I picked up a girl first, and we stopped at a T-intersection right by her apartment. The way the streets were set up, I could go left or right, and either way it would be about the same distance to the next friend's place, about a mile away. I sat there for about 2 full minutes, trying to decide which way to go even though it didn't really matter. Finally, I turned right and headed toward the major street near her house. As I was driving down that street, a car turned left about 300 feet ahead of me and completely stopped. This white station wagon was blocking all 3 lanes. Since I was in the middle lane, I slammed on my brakes, but my car still crashed into the station wagon. After checking on my friend in the passenger seat, I got out to see the other car. When I looked in through the driver's side window, I saw an elderly couple, not wearing seatbelts. The husband was slouched against the door with his head resting on the window, and his wife was leaning against him. I saw someone standing at the intersection where they were supposed to turn, so I yelled for them to call an ambulance. A few minutes later, ambulances arrived and moved all of us, my friend, the elderly couple, and me, to the sidewalk while they checked us out. During this, the old man kept asking, almost indignantly, "Who hit me?" After the first few times, I said, a little annoyed, "I did. I was mostly thinking about my car being totaled." He then told the paramedic he thought his neck was broken. The paramedic, sounding a bit annoyed, said if it was broken, he wouldn't be talking to us. The paramedics took the elderly couple away in an ambulance. Another ambulance came but could only take 1 person, so I told them to take my friend. Later, a final ambulance arrived to take me to the hospital. At the hospital, a female police officer took my statement. Afterward, I asked her what happened to the couple. She told me the wife never regained consciousness and died from a broken neck. The husband also injured his neck and died a few hours later. I became extremely depressed after that, and I'm still not completely over it more than 10 years later. Even writing this brings back painful memories and questions, like why I spent so long at that intersection, why I didn't hit the brake sooner, or try to swerve around the car. I have seen therapists and counselors since then, and while it has helped, I don't think the pain will ever fully go away. It's still one of the hardest things I've ever had to live with.